Hi everybody, welcome to this Master Investor Masterclass where we're talking about investing in the age of longevity. And in particular, in this session, we're going to be talking about the science of longevity. My name is Phil Newman. I am the founder and CEO of First Longevity and also the editor-in-chief of Longevity Technology. Let's introduce our panelists today. First up, we have James Lawford Davis, who's a partner at Hill Dickinson and who specializes in life sciences and health tech regulation and litigation. Welcome, James. And we also have Paulina Mamashina, who's the chief scientist and chief operating officer at Deep Longevity, the Hong Kong-based company that uses deep learning and bioinformatics to identify biomarkers of aging. Hey, Paulina.
Hi, Phil.
Good, and we have a pillar of the longevity scene, Reason, co-founder of Repair Biotechnologies and editor of Fight Aging. Always good to see you, Reason.
Hi again.
And Eric Verdin, who's the CEO and president of the Buck Institute for Research and Aging in San Francisco. Welcome, Eric.
Good to be here, Phil.
Great. So thanks everybody for joining us here today. Let's jump right in. Lots has happened since Longevity Week 2019. So let's talk about the last 12 months and understand whether we've seen a further validation or not of the progression of longevity science and its reality. So Paulina, let's start with you. You guys have been very busy at Deep Longevity. Lots going on with you, I see. So what's the last year been like for you guys?
All right. Yeah, it was great, actually. So we spun out Deep Longevity from Insilico Medicine, and actually a couple of weeks ago, we've been acquired by, we're still subject to acquirement by the public company in Hong Kong. So for us, it was a really fast exit. We started as a company in 2019, and then in July, we raised funds, and now we are acquired, which is great. In terms of what's been new in the field, I believe that we are right now really close to having validated biomarkers of aging out there. And that's a huge progress in a whole domain, because right now we can actually validate new anti-aging therapies. We can check their efficacy. Presumably we can also check their safety, but it's something that could help us to even do in future clinical trials on longevity interventions, which is great.
Very good. And I understand you've been doing some work with the FDA, or at least talking with the FDA. That's interesting.
Yeah, we had some discussions, like parts of webinars or webinar series. And yeah, that's something that we will still have to do. FDA is probably ready to talk right now on how we can solve any regulatory issues or some of the regulatory issues with biomarkers of aging, but still there are a lot of things we will have to do before we can have first biomarker of aging used in clinical trial.
Great. Well, of course, biomarkers is a big subject, and I'm sure we're going to touch on that later. Reason, how about you? Busy year?
Well, I'm running a company here, so I barely have time to think. But I will say that the thing that's caught my attention in the last year is possibly a little mild for me, but the gut microbiome. There's been a significant amount of new information and new advances in that part of the field that make it look very ripe for people to come in and start companies of a variety of types. And really, we've only had, I think, 2 or 3 groups do this, and they're doing it in a very narrow way. I mean, obviously, we have Viome, and we have the folk doing the athletic bacterial type that makes you healthier. They want to deliver it as some kind of probiotic or its output as some kind of supplement. But I think there's a tremendous chance to really improve the health of older people here based on simply applying the existing technology of fecal microbial transplantation to a parabiotic sort of approach where you take young donors and bring their gut microbiome over to old people in a safe way. And most of the safety aspects have already been sorted out for the use that this technology is put to in conditions where your gut is overtaken by pathological bacteria. And the results in animals have been quite eye-opening. So I feel that this is a area very ripe for investment and development, and whoever gets in here first is going to be quite fat and happy at the end of the day, metaphorically speaking, of course.
Unless they participate in some fasting, of course. Good. So, James, how about you guys? Hill Dickinson, you've been busy over these last 12 months, I'd imagine?
We have, yeah. I mean, I look at the science through the somewhat tinted, or you might say tainted, lens of policy and regulation. And it's fair to say that for a lot of companies, it's been a tough year, unless they're manufacturing PPE or anything to do with COVID vaccines. That said, there have been some notable positives, I think, on the policy front and in terms of regulation. Earlier, at the start of the year, it was really reassuring to hear the Secretary of State for Health reconfirm the government's commitment to longevity, speaking at the all-party parliamentary group. And internationally as well, I think there have been some positives. Most recently, and Eric will know more about this than me, I think the vote in support of refunding CERM in California to the tune of 5.5 billion is a really positive step and an extraordinary sum of money to support research in this area. So I thought that was a positive sign about the public support for regenerative medicine and longevity. And then in terms of regulation, having mentioned COVID, I think it has actually been very encouraging to see that where there is an agreed and coordinated policy agreement that a particular area or a particular aspect of research is identified as a priority, we can make sure that approvals are expedited and can get through very quickly, as we've seen with some of the vaccine applications. And I think it's quite interesting to think about how that flexibility and adaptability could be used in other areas in the future if government or governments agree that certain areas need targeting. So some positives, some silver linings from a otherwise somewhat cloudy year.
Right. Okay. And Eric, a lot of work going on at the Buck, I'd imagine. How's the last 12 months been for you guys?
Well, it's been quite an interesting year in the US for a number of reasons. COVID-19 in some way just reminded us of the importance of the work we do. The fact that the disease disproportionately affects in a negative way the elder has really brought again this a need for better understanding of what are the mechanisms that underlie aging and how can we mitigate them, not only to prevent the disease and its worst outcome, but also looking forward in 2021, we're going to have a number of vaccines available, and we know that under normal conditions, only about 30% of people above 70 years old will respond to the flu vaccine, and we cannot expect any different from COVID-19 and the vaccines that are going to emerge. So I think the problem remains and will be further exacerbated if we want to conquer this epidemic and protect the people who are most at risk. We will need to better understand the reason for immune failure as we age. And in this respect, I think the year was mixed in terms of research in aging. As you know, we are in a key transition period where we are trying to translate all of these basic discoveries into deliverable. And we've seen this year two pretty visible failures of clinical trials, which I think is an important reminder to all of us how easy it is to do and to discover basic mechanism in the laboratory setting, and how hard it is to actually translate these discoveries into humans. I think the field has taken these failures in stride because it is the fate of actually most trials will fail. But the silver lining is that one of those will work. And so we're starting 2021 soon with renewed hope and excitement about all the different opportunities that we have in this field.
Very good. Well, of course, there's a science panel today that we need to dig into the science of longevity. Now, senolytics is one of those areas of therapies that is attracting a lot of attention at the moment, targeting senescent cells that have reached the limits of their division, but obviously forgotten to die. There's a lot associated with this science area in terms of anticipation and investment activity. So The downside of that, of course, is that it's not proven yet. There are some issues associated with that, and you mentioned obviously some of the trials that have failed there, Eric. So, how do we separate the positive side of senolytics and senolytic therapies from their potential dark side? What do you think, Eric?
Well, again, one of the trials that failed was the Unity trials on knee osteoarthritis. I think despite this failure, there are a number of reasons why this trial might have failed that actually give us renewed hope that the approach might still be valid. The field of senescence is right at the beginning. Again, the interventions and the drug trials in animal models have been nothing short of remarkable. So I remain really bullish about what this technology will bring. However, the basic science and the research also tells us that it is a lot more complicated than we had estimated at the beginning. There are multiple forms of latency. There are multiple mechanisms of induction of latency, of senescence. And one therefore can anticipate that complexity is going to be required to tackle the different forms of senescence. And I think this is pretty much where the field is. Forging forward with senolytic trials. I think Unity is conducting other trials right now in the eye. There are still some significant concerns about systemic toxicity. And this is why Unity is taken to target senescent cells in unique compartments. So initially the knee for knee osteoarthritis, and now the eye with glaucoma and macular degeneration. I think there are some others who are actually targeting more systemically. Jim Kirkland and Mayo Clinic has been conducting some preliminary trials, some of which actually have been promising, but again, we're really early.
Okay, and Paulina, what are your views on the field of senolytics?
Yeah, I agree that we are a bit early there. Again, the dose might be an issue. Again, how you target the therapy, and also where you will stop. For example, if the tissue is already so senescent that, let's say, 70% or major percent of the cells that are damaged, and you are kind of applying the therapy, maybe it will be just too much. I'm just thinking about, let's say, we'll use it for rejuvenate skin, or remove cells, senescent cells in the skin. If you just reduce so much of the cells, I mean, that will be just too much for a human, a lot of side effects. Again, I believe that we're still yet to identify a set of markers that will be really specific to senolytics in humans, so we can measure the efficacy and whether those markers are actually correlated with mortality and lifespan. Whether they're, let's say, increase or decrease in certain markers that's suggesting that the therapy is working would be connected to the increase or decreased risks of mortality or all-cause mortality or other specific mortalities there. So those factors will still have to be defined before we can actually go and say that, yes, in some way, those therapies are benefiting the lifespan and the healthy human lifespan. So we have to find a set of markers for those.
Okay, and Reason, what's your view on senolytics?
Well, I'm not a scientist by profession, so I don't have to be quite as conservative as the rest of you in order to maintain my scientific credentials. So I think that the senolytics in animal models are the most impressive thing we've seen since induced pluripotency, in the sense that it is really, really easy for any lab to up and destroy senescent cells selectively, and to the extent they succeed, they get very, very impressive benefits reliably in mice. I mean, life extended, disease turned back, things that you would think are not reversible, like cardiac hypertrophy, actually reversed in animal models. It's very impressive indeed. And I feel I could go out on a limb here and say I believe that the most important drug for Alzheimer's of the next 10 years will be dasatinib. And we will find that out quite soon, as there is a trial set up for that that's starting roundabout now-ish. These are very important drugs. The upside is so huge, and the various first generation senolytics have very well understood safety data. Frankly, I think the community is doing far too little right now. to be out there getting the necessary human trials going based on what is known. And so it's a little overcautious, perhaps, given what's out there. So in the sense that there are downsides potentially. I mean, for example, there was the bit about NAD plus upregulation, maybe increasing the senescence-associated secretory phenotype, and the ongoing question of, are there cells that are senescent that you don't want to destroy? And all of that is you can, these effects exist. The effects are always there. The question is never, are the effects there? They are. The question is, how big are they? How big is the effect size? Do we care? And to the extent that mice are living longer because of this, that suggests that we should forge ahead on this. And people have been using drugs like dasatinib in very aggressive ways for cancer. And we have any amount of data that shows that volunteers taking it once look pretty good. We should be doing more. That's my take.
Well, that's good to hear, because there's a lot of work going on in this space, and we've seen a number of let's call them supplements that have come onto the marketplace, making some claims around the area of senolytics. So James, as the line starts to blur sometimes between therapy and supplement, what's the legal view on how companies should be going to market with these claims?
Well, like Reason, I'm not a scientist. But unlike Reason, my job is to be very cautious and precautionary. And I'm sorry if it sounds like doom and gloom by contrast, but the concern about claims it straddles two different legal areas. One is the issue relating to medicines regulation. So you can get into a lot of trouble if you make claims or you advertise and promote a product which isn't licensed, and that varies depending on which jurisdiction you're in, and it varies enormously between countries. But certainly in the UK, it's a criminal offence to market or advertise an unlicensed medicinal product. And it's also relevant to your to your application if you do then seek to take a product to market, if you're making claims about what it can do, and that's one of the things that the regulators will always look at. The second consideration is related to that, and that's the advertising regulations. So again, in the UK, we have very strict rules about what you're allowed to do by way of promoting and advertising medicinal products. And again, if you make claims about a product or about a therapy, you need to be able to substantiate that, ideally with clinical data. But you can, again, get into quite hot water if you make unsubstantiated claims about a new therapy. The temptation is always there. But there are many, many examples of people overstepping the mark in terms of what they claim. And again, caution is advised, but I'm a lawyer, so I'm bound to say that.
Yeah, caution where there's an audience of people that are actually, in some cases, very interested in pursuing quite radical self-experimentation. So Eric, in relation to this line between therapy and supplements, and the blurring of that in some cases, what is your opinion on this?
I think it's important to remember how we got here and where we are today. So if you look at what's been accomplished in the last 150 years, there's been an increase in lifespan of close to 35 years, and it's been based on science. It's been based on demonstrating efficacy. So I think if the field of aging wants to establish true legitimacy and recognition, I think it will have to prove that its interventions are actually efficacious. Now, there's something else that's happening, which is quite interesting and which I embrace, is this idea of that a significant fraction of the population actually feels that they are it's in their own right to take measurable risk and to adopt some therapies even before they have been demonstrated to be efficacious. And I think I also support this as long as there's some evidence for safety. And we see right now a proliferation of a number of supplements. I'm thinking in the NAD space, the beta-hydroxybutyrate, the esters of ketone bodies, alpha-ketoglutarate is another one. We see many of those coming to the market without any claims and with the possibility for people to test them out. I think in the long, and I think this is totally fine, many of those are likely to be very safe. But it would be important in the future for the true clinical trials to be conducted and for efficacy to be demonstrated. So I'm of two minds. We've also learned that there's been some frustration with, at least in the US, with the speed at which the FDA approves drugs and how difficult it is. One reason for this is there have been a number of instances in the past where approved drugs have actually still even proved to be toxic. So there are many reasons to be cautious, but there's also, we've seen with COVID-19 that the process can be accelerated. And I think I would embrace the sense of urgency that we had for COVID-19 for therapies that target the aging field. And so there's a lot of movement right now, and I think this is good. So we can expect things to change for the better.
That's good to hear. And generally recognized as safe or GRAS supplements is something that we're covering a lot on our news platforms. So Reason, what's your thought about this, bridging the line between therapy and supplement?
Well, I'm very in favor of let the market figure out efficacy. You'll get faster results than if you want the regulators to only approve things that are efficacious. Let's show safety and then let people figure out what works, because that way you're actually much more likely to get a market that's sizable enough to support randomized controlled blind trials in which you can rigorously prove that something actually works when people think it does. And the money will be there for that if you have a pre-existing market, but you can only really do the pre-existing market sanely if you show safety. So of course, the history of these things includes cigarettes, and everybody who thinks that the FDA type regulatory path is the sane way to go probably looks with horror at the cosmetics regulatory path and vice versa, because they are radically different. And in terms of how much work you get to do before you let people just go take the thing and consider it safe. And as Eric points out, frankly, it doesn't matter how much regulation you throw at the problem, you're still going to get some fraction of new products shown 1 year, 5 year, 10 years after the fact that, wait, that wasn't such a good idea. Maybe we shouldn't do it this way. So I think there's definitely I like the pressure that supplements put on the medical industry. But on the other hand, very few things on the supplement side of the house are actually efficacious enough to care about. And whether that's a coincidence or whether that's just a matter of people looking under the light for things they can use that happen to vaguely tickle mechanisms of interest, I'm not sure. But I think that supplements would have to get a lot better than they are right now in order to be a really interesting place.
Okay, that's good to hear. And I guess, Paulina, in your work, developing biomarkers as you are now, you must be very absorbed in seeing what people are doing with their therapeutic intake as well as their supplement intake. What's the view from the deep scientist?
Right. So let's say that supplements are more accessible compared to something that you have to prescribe. Therefore, if we're thinking about healthy people, and this is the group we are generally focused on when we're trying to understand the efficacy of those therapies or their effect on aging process, it's a bit tricky to get them on any of the medication that has to be prescribed, especially in States, indicate the same. So unless they have a doctor who kind of understand the aging process and, for example, prescribe them metformin that's considered to be generally safe and has been shown to work against some of the aging processes. And we know that there are retrospective studies and meta studies showing that pre-diabetics on metformin, they live longer compared to in healthy people, let's say our average healthy people. And we know that metformin works. It's one of those drugs that is the promising one. Yet it's, again, a bit tricky to get people taking metformin. For supplements, it's a bit easier. But in supplements, we already see that not all supplements, they work in the same direction. And the dose and also the schedule people are taking those supplements is really important. Even with fasting, they can go not in the right direction with their blood parameters and therefore their biological age. same for supplements. If they are overdosed with the supplements, or they just taking them for too long, or continually taking them without any breaks, that could then damage their biological age and blood parameters not in the right direction, and potentially have some side effects, because we know that the biological age is associated with risks of developing disorders. So in having something that is not working in favor and kind of making the clock ticking faster, it's not good. Even though they're safe, still I suggest to have a physician who understands how things work to prescribe those, or at least suggest you on a dose, or at least know how to adjust the dose once you're on the supplement, so you are, let's say, guided in the right direction. Because again, even with fasting, with some diets, it can be rather damaging.
And I guess that the layperson does need clinical guidance, and I do feel that there's a big layer missing in the industry at this stage, that clinical layer, that educated clinical layer. So let's move on, as this is an investment session, to ask the panel what they feel is good and investable in the longevity space. And just while we were talking to you then, Polina, you've been doing some work now by deploying your tech into the clinical environment and training clinicians. So with that and beyond that, what do you feel are the hot areas of longevity investment over the coming period?
I think those longevity clinics that are emerging right now, they're hot areas. That will be actually the tool that will deliver first aging clocks to the general audience, but also therapies. Because again, you have to prescribe those, you have to adjust this most of the time, even diet has to be adjusted. You have to educate people what they should take. And in some countries, some of the therapies that we discussed already today, they're only under prescription, so they has to be prescribed. So I believe that those longevity clinics, there will be really good investment opportunities for in the near future.
Okay, and Reason, I know that you've been very keen on pointing out how where the gaps are in terms of some of the commercialization of science in longevity. What do you feel are perhaps the areas that are active and hot associated with this field?
Well, I think obviously I'm a SENS enthusiast when it comes to the view of aging, the areas in which you're going to have high expectation of producing large benefits, and you're not just messing around with tinkering with the metabolism of late stage disease. I think that the interesting way of looking at that is that there are some narrow areas, single target areas, and there are some very, very, very broad areas, and nothing in between. So what you're seeing right now is considerable enthusiasm for the narrow areas, the single target issues, and that would be, let's say, clearance of senescent cells. You have one target, those cells, go get rid of them. There will be a few winners in that marketplace, and there's a lot of competition to get there, and the winning will happen fairly quickly in the grand scheme of things. A decade from now, we'll pretty much know what we're doing for the next 20 years when it comes to senescent cells. Mitochondrial function, same story. One organelle, make it work better. 10 years from now, we'll be a lot further along knowing what we're going to be doing for the next 20 to 30 in that one. Where most of the investment will end up going over the next 30 years is not these things, because they will be won quite quickly. Where most of the investment will end up going is into clearance of metabolic waste and stem cell function. There are 100 and something different types of stem cells in the human body, more getting added every passing year. And metabolic waste, I mean, there's 20 different types of amyloid, 20 something types, never mind all the rest of it. If you look at a company like Underdog Pharmaceuticals, which is focused on clearing 7-keto-cholesterol via a sort of small molecule type of approach, you could have 100 of those companies in this industry, each of them targeting one specific form of waste. And these things can grow quite big. If you look at the companies that are currently tackling transthyretin amyloid, for example, if you have success there, you become a multi-billion-dollar company. And that will be true for every single form of molecular waste in the body that causes meaningful damage. And that's probably 100+ forms of molecular waste. It's a very, 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 very large industry. And that is going to be the enormous hinterland. And people who get ahead in that, and when I say people, I mean investors, investors who get ahead in this way of looking at things, I think are going to find themselves very well placed rather than competing in the narrow areas of senescent cells and mitochondrial function.
Oh, that's very good to hear. So not a shortage of things for investors to look at in the field of longevity, in your opinion, Reason. And Eric, you're at the front line of a lot of new and early stage R&D. Where do you feel that the new opportunities are going to be for investors?
So I think, well, I don't completely agree with Reason. I think one of the most robust intervention that has been shown to modulate aging in all animal models we've tested is calorie restriction, or modulation of dietary intake, which is incredibly complex. And that's where I differ with Reason. I feel that these fields, we've just barely begun to scratch the surface in understanding what is the underlying mechanism that explains the profound effect that we see with calorie restriction. And that includes, by the way, actually increasing disposal of damaged tissues and proteins via autophagy. So I really view the whole damage disposal issue as part of the calorie restriction response. So the field in this respect is moving to try to understand what are the multiple pathways that are activated, and this has led to the creation of a slew of the identification of a slew of targets and their attendant drugs that we call actually calorie restriction mimetics. And your audience will probably be familiar with the rapalogs. Rapamycin is one of those calorie restriction mimetics. The same goes for metformin. The same goes for NAD modulators. So these are the first line drug in this very broad field of calorie restriction mimetic, but we see many others coming that will be second line, including drugs that activate autophagy. Autophagy is a process of self-digestion that specifically targets misfolded proteins, and so we can see now a specific autophagy activators. So I view that space, the more we are digging into the relationship between nutrition and longevity, the more we identify the complexity and new drugs. So I think, to me, that remains one of the biggest area of immediate and future investigation. I'm also quite interested by the intervention that today actually yields the biggest net effect in terms of longevity for humans is actually exercise in all of its forms. And there is a lot of effort. There are a lot of efforts right now underway to try to understand how does exercise actually maximize lifespan and health span. And so targets, again, here are being identified, and there's an intensive search for what people call the exercise mimetics. Short of exercising, and not all of us want to exercise. If you are able to exercise, I think this is probably the most important thing that you can do today for your longevity. But in the future, we envisage a future that's made of specific drugs that might actually recapitulate some of the beneficial effect of exercise.
Interesting. So really no shortage of opportunities for investors to participate in the field. You guys are all at the top of your game. So interested to know what actually gets you out of bed in the morning and gets you thinking about your work and the field of longevity. James, let's start with you.
Thanks. Well, I wouldn't want anyone to think that Brexit gets me out of bed in the morning, but I think the coming year is going to be very interesting in terms of how we adjust to a new world, both hopefully, God willing, post-COVID and post-Brexit. And in legal terms, it's quite exciting because you don't often get to a point where there is such a level of uncertainty about how the regulatory landscape is going to evolve. The other topic that's very close to my heart, which I probably talk about too much, but something that I do think is gathering momentum again and is likely to be a growing issue for the next 12 months is genome editing. It's had a quiet year, but I think that just the volume of research and interest and investment in genome editing is going to lead to a greater demand for its clinical approval and, and use and approval for clinical use, which kind of goes back to the point earlier that we were talking about in terms of the therapeutic versus non-therapeutic use, because there the policy arguments relating to genome editing are radically different when you're looking at therapeutic applications compared to non-therapeutic. So that's something that I'm quietly confident is going to come up again in the next 12 months, and certainly gets me out of bed.
Good. And reason I get the impression that you do quite a lot of thinking and quite a lot of wrangling of some of the subjects that you deal with, whether it's editorially or scientifically. What's interesting for you at the moment?
Well, obviously, I mean, I run Fight Aging, so I see a lot of stuff going past, and it's really hard to pick out things that are tremendously interesting, because there is so much interesting work going on right now that's going to be very influential on everyone's lives in 5 to 10 years from now. You know, getting me out of bed in the morning, I run a company, Repair Biotechnologies. We have a tremendous platform for eliminating cholesterols and damaged cholesterols from the body. The human body can't normally do that. And we have shown that we can meaningfully reverse atherosclerotic lesions in mice to a degree that's up there with the best of what's been achieved via a variety of other methods that can't be translated into humans, whereas our method can. So we're having that glorious end of preclinical phase moving into the clinical phase right now. It's a very exciting time for the company, and we hope to do a great deal of good in the world in the years ahead.
Good. All things changing in the US market as well with the new administration as well, of course. So, Eric, what's your view on exciting projects that you're dealing with that you could perhaps share with us?
You mean right now?
Yeah.
Well, again, another area that we are quite interested in is the ketogenesis. We published a paper a little bit more than a year ago, a couple of years ago, showing that mice on a ketogenic diet actually showed an increase in health span and a remarkable preservation of memory. We actually have a product coming on the market that recapitulates many of the effects of a ketogenic diet. It's a beta hydroxybutyrate ester, so it's an ester of the major ketone body that allows one to attain a state of ketonemia even while being maintained on a regular diet. So this is a collaboration that between the Bach Institute and Ketogenesis. We're quite excited by bringing this product to market. And again, this is one of these what we call calorie restriction mimetics. It'd be interesting to see what are how this type of approach is received and its effect in the long run.
Very good. And Paulina, I guess you're spending more time looking at code than cells. What gets you out of bed in the morning?
Right. Yeah. I think the whole industry that I see that it's emerging right now. We have so many investors coming who are like just only solely dedicated to investing in startups that are working in the aging field. So Apollo Ventures, I believe that you have Latham them on the panel, Longevity Vision Fund, Longevity Fund, all of those, Ketogenesis, as Eric said. So that's a whole new ecosystem emerging, again, with wellness clinics, with companies like ours and Reasons and other companies who are working on either new markers of aging that will help us to validate new therapeutics or new therapeutics and longevity interventions. That's really exciting. And I believe that soon we will have new clinical trials in human showing the efficacy of aging. Actually, some of those results have been already published by Professor Steve Howard. He recently published really preliminary, but still first results in humans, how we can reverse biological age. So the coming year will be really promising. And thinking about COVID, I believe that it actually should change consumer behavior a lot, because we know, again, that's a gerolatic disease. We know that chances of getting complications of COVID because of age increasing dramatically. Therefore, we have to be focused again on aging side of it. At the same time, I believe people are more cautious about their own health. So the way making decisions, the way they're behaving is going to change, and it's changed already just because of COVID. So I believe that it will be different, both, let's say, from consumer, but also from the industry perspective, just because of that.
Okay. So in relation to behavior change, having a panel of experts to answer a very basic question is an interesting one for somebody like myself. So Polina, maybe just back to you. So what are you doing yourself for your own longevity? You know, you must be seeing some interesting stuff that you're putting through your biomarker systems.
Right. So I'm right now in a bit of a break in terms of supplements. I've been on some supplements a couple of weeks ago. I'm taking only like really basic general stuff. But what I do daily, I do measure my biological age. So we have an app that helps me to do that. So each day I do at least a selfie, and then I measure my blood once, let's say every 2 months, every 3 months, I measure my blood. Probably a bit too often, but still it's something for me to track. And then try to measure my sleep, my stress levels. It's not easy again, given the fact that we have this year with a lot of complications due to COVID and all that, travel restrictions and so on. But still, so I'm trying to optimize that from the beginning again, because we know that those simple things, they work a lot, and I already see that in terms of my biological age reversal, just by optimizing my sleep patterns and my exercise schedule, I was able to, you know, just like get rid of 2 extra biological ages recently. Yeah.
Great. So the youngest person on the panel is getting younger then?
Probably.
Yeah.
I don't know. We need to measure your biological age, then we can compete only in biological age. Chronological age doesn't matter much.
Okay, good. And James, how about yourself?
Yes, I have 4 children, so I think I'm suffering from premature aging as a consequence, but I'm running a lot, so I focus very much on exercise, not doing quite so well on dietary management, but I've been very impressed by the positive effects on the level of exercise just in my community. I sit at a window, and I think most days half of the village runs past my window, which I think reflects a newfound love of exercise in the UK, at least, well, this part of the UK. But yeah, just exercise for me.
Good. And Reason, I bet you're up to a few interesting things.
One suspects that this newfound love of running in the population at large has a lot to do with not being allowed to go anywhere other than outside, right? It's the way things go in this present plague year. So, I mean, obviously, you do the things that are high expectation. You calorie restrict, you exercise. These are things that you can comfortably do if you're in 99.9% of the population and expect to obtain benefits. But if you're going to self-experiment, you have to measure. You can't just do something and then think better of yourself, because A, you're probably not doing it well enough, and B, some people don't get benefits that they think they're getting from the minor levels of whatever they're doing, on the grounds the placebo effects are a real thing, and self-delusion is another one. You have to go do blood work. You have to pick up assessments that make sense for what you're trying to do, and then look at before and after. And on that topic, I should say that it's not terribly clear that these aging clocks are actually actionable. For example, the epigenetic clock, the original one, doesn't seem very sensitive to exercise. You can be sedentary, you can exercise, you get the same epigenetic age. There was a twin study that showed that. So you have to think about these things a little bit. There are a lot of options out there, particularly for people who want to be adventurous and go out there and get actual drugs and use them, such as senolytics. And obviously, a great deal of personal responsibility goes with that. So there are many options. It can be quite the hobby, but one should think about this carefully and approach it sensibly.
Okay. And Eric, how about yourself?
So one thing that to realize is that there will be drugs in our future that will increase longevity and health span. But I'm convinced that this time has not come yet, and at least verified, demonstrably efficacious drugs in terms of aging. So I think all of us are left to optimizing everything that we can optimize, and there are a number of factors that I think are really key. Nutrition is one. Incorporating some fasting, and I do incorporate some fasting in my routine. Exercise is really one of the key in terms of demonstrated effect in terms of longevity and health span. And it's, there's a lot of research trying to understand what form of exercise. Is it aerobic, anaerobic, stretching? It seems to be a mixture of all of them. So that's really one of the focus of my effort. Stress reduction is really key. Focusing on your microbiome is also a key. That's also part of your nutrition. And I always tell people the most important thing that you can probably do, at least when we look at the major risk factor for longevity, are your social network. That is, so if your interventions in your lifestyle with the hope of increasing aging turns you into a curmudgeon who has no friends, you probably are missing the point. So a social network is the strongest predictor of your longevity, as is a sense of purpose. So I think I try to mix all of this together in some harmonious mix. I think this is what we can all aspire to.
Well, that's probably a good opportunity for us to pause there. So that's good, wise words, Eric. So well, I'd like to thank our panel. Unfortunately, we're out of time today. We've had a number of questions come through the chat channel, which we'll endeavour to address at the end of the session. So it only remains me to thank our panelists today, James Lawford-Davis of Hill Dickinson, Paulina Mamashina of Deep Longevity, Reason of Repair Biotechnologies and Fight Aging, and Eric Verdin of the Buck Institute. So thanks very much for your time today, everybody. Really appreciate it.